He mopped our floors for 11 years. We never even learned his name. Until one day, he corrected a VP's Mandarin mid-meeting while emptying a trash can. Turns out the janitor spoke 9 languages. And what the CEO did next didn't just shock the office. It changed the company forever. This is not a story about language. This is a story about being seen after a lifetime of being invisible. That day, he slammed the elevator button 3 times, barking into his phone. I don't care if she's in labor. Get me the damn quarterly report or don't bother showing up again. Then he turned and his eyes locked on me. Hey, you. I paused. My gloves smelled of bleach. My mop bucket squeaked against the marble floor. That trash can. He pointed to a corner office. It's full. Handle it. I nodded silently, pushing my cart forward. But the words I was reading from the printed memo in my hand were not in English. They were in fluent French. I whispered to myself, translating each line back into my mother tongue Vietnamese, just to remember who I was. Just to stay human. My name is Minh Tran. 58 years old. Janitor. Vietnamese immigrant. Widower. I mop the floors of Stratacore International, the tech giant, sitting in the heart of New York. No one knows that I speak 9 languages. No one ever asks. To them, I am invisible. A shadow that wipes windows, disinfects toilets, replaces trash bags. My uniform has no name tag. My stories have no ears. But I watch. I listen. And on that Tuesday morning, I heard something that changed everything. It began like any other day. The conference room buzzed with corporate tension executives in tailored suits pacing in circles, screens blinking with projections. I was quietly collecting empty coffee cups moving like vapor between their frantic motion. That's when I heard her Stacy Lynn VP of Strategy ranting to someone over Zoom in Mandarin. Her tone was sharp irritated. She misused several idioms, confused business terms, and when she struggled with a phrase, I couldn't help it. I corrected her softly under my breath. 你什么说市场渗透，不是市场潜水. She froze. What did you just say? I blinked. The entire room turned. Even Mr. Ramsey, the stone-faced CEO, glanced up from his screen. My mop hovered over a spilled latte. Sorry, ma'am, I muttered. I was just talking to myself. She narrowed her eyes. You speak Mandarin. I hesitated, then nodded. And French, I added quietly. And Russian, Spanish, Arabic, Hindi, Japanese, German, and English. Silence fell over the room. The kind that feels like thunder in disguise. Ramsey rose from his chair. What did you just say? I looked at him, no longer shrinking. I speak 9 languages, sir. I used to be a linguist. Back in Vietnam, I translated for embassies. War changed that. Life changed that. Now I mop floors. They stared like I'd grown wings. But one man scoffed, Trent Collins, head of operations. Blonde hair, tight jaw, and a smirk that never left his face. This is a joke, right? He sneered. What's next? He's a brain surgeon in disguise. He laughed. No one joined him. But Ramsey didn't laugh. He walked over to me slowly, measured, eyes scanning me like I was a chess piece he hadn't realized was on the board. What's your name, Min? I said. Minh Tran. You're on night shift, right? I've seen you here. He turned to Stacy. Book him a meeting slot. Tomorrow morning. Boardroom A. Everyone blinked. Stacy stammered. Sir, he's the janitor. Ramsey's voice was cold steel. He's clearly more than that. And I want to know why the hell I didn't know he existed. Then he walked out. Just like that. I stood there, mop in hand, the world turning on its axis. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on my narrow bed in my shared Queens apartment, the city's sirens humming through cracked windows. I held a photo of my wife Lynn in my hands, her smile frozen in time. She used to say, "Min, one day someone will see you. All of you." I never believed her, until now. Tomorrow I would walk into a boardroom not to clean it, but to speak. Not as the janitor, but as Min Tran man of words history and silent survival. I didn't know what they wanted from me, but I knew this for the first time in decades. I was being seen. At precisely 8:58 a.m., I stood outside Boardroom A. I wore my janitor uniform, faded navy blue with bleach stains across the thigh. It was all I owned. My shoes were cracked near the heel soles, taped from the inside with leftover packing tape. But I stood straight, chin level, the way I used to stand before a panel of foreign ministers with my notepad and headset. I inhaled slowly. The scent of floor polish still clung to my sleeves. Behind the doors, I heard voices, corporate ones, measured, calculated, each syllable coated with money and management degrees. Then I heard his voice let him in. The door opened. It was Stacy Lynn. She looked at me like I was a problem HR hadn't figured out how to categorize yet. "Right this way, Mr. Tran," she said, clipped and cold. I stepped inside. 12 people. Suits, laptops, coffee cups from overpriced cafes. At the head of the table, Calvin Ramsey, 51, CEO. Clean-shaven, powerfully built gray suit, sharper than a blade, but with eyes that missed nothing. He gestured to the seat across from him. I sat. The chair creaked under my weight. I didn't flinch. "Man," he began, fingers laced. "We looked into your employment records. You've been with Stratacor for 11 years. Night janitor, 0 complaints, no sick days. You clock out 5 minutes early only when there's a subway delay. Is that right?" "Yes, sir." "And you speak 9 languages?" "Yes, sir." Ramsey leaned forward. "Why?" I paused. Then answered the way my wife Lynn taught me truthfully. "Because words are bridges." In my village, before I came here, speaking someone's language meant you could save their life. Or your own. I learned to survive by understanding. First French, then Mandarin, then everything else the war brought. The room was silent. Stacy interrupted. "Forgive me, but what use is this now? We're a tech company. We don't hire translators." Ramsey raised a brow. "That's what I intend to find out." He turned to me again. "We have a problem, Min. A deal on the table with a partner in Munich. The German translation software we're using is unreliable. Misread a critical clause cost us $500,000. Could you look at the original contract?" He handed me a printed page. I scanned it once, then twice. I tapped my finger against a paragraph. This line I said in German. "Unbedingte Zustimmung" was interpreted as mandatory compliance in your system. But here it implies unconditional goodwill. That's legally different. Stacy blinked. Ramsey nodded slowly. "Could you translate the whole thing?" I looked at him. "Right now." "Yes." So I did. German to English. Every paragraph, every footnote. I even corrected a misspelled word in Clause 9. When I finished, the CFO, Mr. Helmsley, leaned back, visibly stunned. "That's perfect," he whispered. But not everyone was pleased. Trent Collins scoffed again. "Okay, so what the janitor's got? Google Translate in his head. Congrats. You want to make him chief linguist now." Ramsey didn't respond to him. He looked only at me. You said you used to be a translator for embassies. I nodded. Then I want to ask you something real. No politics, no tech, just human. He paused. We have a team in Mumbai. They're struggling with our directives, miscommunication, poor morale. Could you talk to them? I blinked. Now, he pointed to the screen behind him. A Zoom window opened. 5 faces from India, all mid-level developers, all clearly tired. One rubbed his eyes, another wore headphones over uncombed hair. Ramsey gestured to me. I stood up, switched to Hindi. Namaste, I began bowing slightly. मुझे माफ कीजिए, मैं एक साफ सफाई कर्मचारी हूँ, पर आज मैं आपका साथी हूँ. The men sat up straighter. One covered his mouth. Another whispered to someone off screen. He speaks our tongue. I continued. Your work matters. Your voices matter. And we're going to make sure the people up here hear both. They smiled. For the first time since the call started. When I sat down, the room was dead silent. Ramsey nodded. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, he clapped. 1, 2, 3 others joined. By the end, everyone but Trent and Stacy was clapping. After the meeting, I expected to be dismissed. Forgotten again. That's how life trained me. But instead, Ramsey pulled me aside. You ever thought of leading something? I looked at him. Sir, he smiled. Not mops, mines. I clean floors. You build bridges. I didn't understand. Not then. But 3 days later, they printed me a new badge, Min Tran, Director of Global Communications Interim. I stared at it in disbelief. Me, the janitor. Now in charge of the words that connect a billion-dollar company. But that didn't come without consequences. That afternoon, my mop cart was missing. My locker ransacked. Someone left a used toilet brush inside it with a sticky note. Traitors don't belong upstairs, and I knew. Not everyone was ready to see a janitor rise, but I was no longer afraid, because I knew 9 languages, and one universal truth. You can't mop away dignity. I thought things would get better after the badge. They didn't. The badge, plastic and gleaming, hung from my chest like a target. Director of Global Communications. That's what it said. But what they saw was the janitor who forgot his place. On my first day in my new role, I stepped into the executive elevator. 3 people stepped out. I didn't say anything. I just pressed the button. But I could hear them whisper as the doors closed. Must be some PR stunt. Diversity checkbox, probably. Still smells like bleach. I clenched my fist, but I didn't speak. Not yet. My new office was a glass box next to the marketing wing. No nameplate. No welcome. Inside, a single desk, a chair, and a monitor still logged into someone else's account. The first email I received wasn't from the CEO. It was from Trent Collins. Reminder, all external comms must be vetted by Ops before Min sends anything. No exceptions. We can't have mistakes in messaging. I read it twice. He didn't write you. He wrote Min, like I was still separate, like I hadn't earned my chair. I pushed on. I called Mumbai. I spoke to them in Hindi, in Gujarati, in English. I rewrote onboarding documents, translated legal notices, and corrected years of broken cold language in internal memos. And every night I stayed late like I always had not, because I had to. But because this was the only time I felt peace. It was around 8:40 p.m. on a Wednesday, when I walked into the break room to grab tea. That's when I overheard them. Stacy, Trent, 2 others, laughing. I mean, what's next? The janitor's gonna be VP Calvin's losing it. You give these people an inch, and they bring their whole village. Then Trent again, quieter. Look, I've got a plan. This guy's not going to last the quarter. I stepped in. Calm. They froze. Evening, I said softly, pouring hot water into my cup. No one replied. Trent stared, a smile twitching at the edge of his lips. You need something, he asked. I stirred my tea. No, just listening. I walked out. The next morning, my email account was locked. I was summoned to HR. The woman behind the desk, Angela Morton, head of compliance, looked uncomfortable. We've received complaints, she said, that you accessed sensitive international documents without clearance. I'm Director of Global Communications, I replied. That's literally my job. She clicked her mouse. Still, protocol must be followed. Then she said something that made my heart stop. Until further notice, you're placed on administrative leave. Effective immediately. I walked out in a daze. People stared, some with pity, some with glee. I passed my old mop closet. The door was ajar. Inside, my cart had been returned. Everything just as I'd left it, down to the broken wheel. And then, taped to the wall, another note. You clean floors, not boardrooms. That night I didn't go home. I went to a place I hadn't visited in years, the Vietnam War Memorial downtown. I stood before the names. My fingers brushed the carved letters. I remembered what my wife Lynn once whispered to me when I told her about my first janitor job. Dignity, she said, isn't what they give you. It's what you refuse to give away. I sat on the bench. My phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. They did this to you because you scare them. Don't stop. See, Calvin Ramsey. The next morning I returned. No badge. No clearance. But I had a copy of every email. Every translated document. Every video call recorded with permission, logged by timestamp, saved on a secure drive. I didn't go to HR. I went to the press. I sent an anonymous tip to the Business Times. Company silences. Immigrant janitor turned director after exposing internal bias and cultural negligence. Story includes multilingual mishandlings, abuse of staff, and intimidation tactics by executives. Then I waited. 2 days later, the story exploded. Who is Mein Tran was the headline. News anchors said my name like it had weight, like it had value. The comments on the article poured in. How many immigrants are being wasted like this? He speaks 9 languages, and they demoted him. Where can we donate to Min? I received 312 messages in one night. The next day, the company gates were surrounded by reporters. And Ramsey, he didn't hide. He held a press conference, right in the atrium of Stratacor's skyscraper. I watched it on live stream. I failed, he said. Not because I promoted Min Tran, but because I didn't protect him. That ends now. Then he paused, and to Trent Collins and all those who tried to sabotage progress, your careers here are over. The next morning I returned to my office. A new plaque sat on the door. Vice President of Global Integrity, Min Tran. The desk was new, the carpet clean, my name engraved in glass, and next to the monitor, a framed quote. You build bridges. Calvin Ramsey. There is a different kind of noise when you're being watched. Not footsteps, not whispers, not even words. Just the sound of silence stretched too thin across suspicion. That's what the office felt like when I returned. I was now Vice President of Global Integrity. The plaque on my door was polished daily. My inbox overflowed with congratulations from strangers and cold indifference from colleagues. The same people who used to hand me coffee-stained mugs now typed warmest regards at the end of hollow emails. They couldn't say what they wanted, so they said nothing. But silence is a language I understand fluently. Ramsey called me into his office. He didn't bother with small talk. He simply pointed to the glass wall where the Stratacore logo gleamed. "I need your help," he said. "Not as my VP, as the man who sees what others don't." He handed me a file, manila folder. No label. I opened it. "Berlin. Our new AI deal," he said. "Something's off. The German partners are jittery. They've suddenly introduced new clauses, vague wording. It reeks of backdoor exploitation." I flipped through the pages, contracts, emails, technical drafts. I paused at one paragraph buried on page 7. A clause written in dense German legalese. I translated it in my mind. Then I froze. It said, "The system shall have backdoor access granted to the German parent firm in perpetuity with monitoring exemption. A legal way to spy on every product Stratacore released without anyone knowing." I looked up. They're embedding a corporate espionage clause. Ramsey's jaw tightened. "You sure?" "Yes." I stood. "I need one day." That night I didn't go home. I stayed in the office long after the lights dimmed. On the 29th floor, I sat by myself with German contract law books, security protocols, and tea in a cracked mug. I also reread a message from my son Bao, now 22. It said, "Dad, you're finally using your brain again. Not just your hands." That sentence cut deeper than he meant it to. By morning, I had something. More than a translation. A counterclause. Worded so precisely, so legally ironclad, that it nullified the back door while preserving the partnership. A linguistic landmine, undetectable unless you knew where to look. I handed it to Ramsey. He scanned it once, then again. Then he smiled. "This is brilliant." He sent it to legal. 3 hours later, the Germans called. They backed down. News traveled fast. By lunch, my inbox was full of inquiries from departments I'd never met. "Could you help us with this multilingual rollout? Would you review this cross-border compliance doc? Could you train our offshore teams?" But not all the attention was welcome. That week, I was invited to speak at a diversity in leadership panel. When I arrived, I found my nameplate had been replaced with special guest Min custodial staff. I stared at it. The woman beside me, a sleek-haired PR exec, leaned over and said, "It's a charming story, you know. From mop to manager. It inspires the interns." I looked her in the eye. "This is not a story," I said. "It's a reckoning." Then I walked off the stage. A few nights later, I returned to my old locker on the maintenance floor. It was empty. Clean, but still dented from years of use. I sat beside it and ran my hand along the metal. That's when Carlos, the night shift janitor, found me. He was 47 Guatemalan and had never once spoken more than a sentence to me in 10 years. Tonight he brought me coffee. In perfect Spanish, he said, "You spoke for all of us when we didn't even know we had a voice." I looked up, surprised. "I didn't know you spoke Spanish," I said. He smiled. "I didn't know you spoke for us." The next morning, I submitted a proposal to Ramsey, Project Bridge Internal Multilingual Task Force, a program that would find employees across departments, janitors, cafeteria workers, data entry clerks who spoke world languages, and train them to become in-house cultural liaisons. No more wasted brilliance behind brooms. No more invisibility. Ramsey approved it within hours. And just like that, the janitors were no longer ghosts. They were advisors, translators, ambassadors. We built a bridge from the basement to the boardroom, and people began to walk across. But there was one thing left. Trent Collins. He hadn't spoken to me since his dismissal, but his name still lingered in hushed complaints. I knew he had allies left, people who hated the shift, hated the thought of someone like me having power. Then one day I found an envelope on my desk. No name. Inside a photo of me in the break room pouring tea. Written across it in red ink. You don't belong here. I closed the door. I sat down, and I whispered to myself in every language I knew. You are seen. You are heard. You belong. Then I did something unexpected. I smiled, because I had spoken 9 languages for years. But now I was learning a 10th, the language of silence, and how to break it. Success, I've learned, is not a destination. It's a hallway, and every door in that hallway is locked from the inside until someone like me figures out how to pick it. The morning the new quarterly meeting was scheduled, I wore the same shoes I had the day I first met Ramsey. Cracked, taped, but clean. I wanted to remember where I came from. As I walked toward the boardroom, I passed the very janitors I once worked beside, now trainees in the Project Bridge program. Morning, Sir Carlos nodded, sweeping beside the elevators. I turned and said to him in Spanish, "Nunca olvides de donde vienes." Never forget where you come from. He smiled. Nunca lo haré. I never will. Inside the boardroom, everything shimmered brushed steel LED lighting, 12 executives, and one massive screen with stock charts. Stacy Lynn was already seated. She hadn't been fired, but she had been transferred head of Regional Strategy Asia Pacific. A step sideways, not down. The company's way of saying, "We won't punish you." But we saw everything. Ramsey stood at the head. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "today's quarterly is about more than earnings. It's about evolution." He turned to me. "Min Tran will present his findings on international communication optimization." I stepped up, plugged in my drive. The lights dimmed. Slides flicked to life. Slide 1, lost in translation, CR, lost in profit. I walked them through a multilingual audit of the company's past 5 years. I showed how bad translation led to mispriced contracts in Brazil, offended partners in South Korea, a full product ban in the UAE, due to a cultural miswording. Language, I said, is not a luxury. It's leverage. Slide 2. The floor above the ceiling. I paused here. I spent over a decade cleaning your floors. I said softly. Below your shoes. Below your attention. But I listened. And I learned. While some climbed ladders, I studied ceilings. A murmur rippled through the room. I continued. What you call fluency, I call survival. What you call diversity, I call necessity. Because in this global age, if your message isn't heard in the right language, it isn't heard at all. Slide 3, Project Bridge results. We had trained 27 hidden multilingual staff across cleaning logistics and support teams. 6 had already resolved cross-border issues with 0 delays. 1 had caught a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme through a misunderstood Japanese phrase. Slide 4, Recommendation, Global Cultural Division. Silence, then clapping, slowly at first, then rising, but not from everyone. Stacy Lynn cleared her throat. With all due respect, Min, she said, not every janitor is you. We can't expect floor staff to run negotiations. I looked at her. No, I said, but maybe we should stop assuming they never could. Ramsey nodded toward me. You've made your case. Later that day, I found myself in the elevator again, this time alone with Stacy. We said nothing for a while. Then she spoke low and quick. You humiliated me. I looked at her. I revealed the truth. If that humiliated you, perhaps it wasn't me. She looked away. I was born here, she muttered. Fought for this job. Then someone like you shows up with tea stains and becomes a hero. I didn't answer immediately. Then I said gently, If I've taken anything from you, maybe you didn't really own it." The elevator chimed. I walked out. That evening, I stayed late again. I walked the halls of Stratacor like I used to with mop in hand. Only now, I wasn't cleaning. I was listening. Down by the old janitor lockers, I found Bao waiting. My son. He had his backpack on and a camera hanging from his neck. "You said I should come film something real," he said. "This story, this building, it's real." I let him in. We walked the same path I once took in silence, hallways, closets, break rooms. He filmed everything. "Tell me what you felt the first day you got this job," he asked. I looked into his lens. "Small," I said, "invisible, but necessary." And now, I smiled. "Still necessary, just not invisible." The next morning, Bao uploaded the video, My Father the Janitor, who spoke 9 languages and saved a company. It went viral within a day, 10 million views. Subtitles in 12 languages. Comments from teachers in Bangladesh, waiters in Poland, refugees in Arizona. "I am Min. Thank you for speaking for us. You made me believe I'm not just my job." That week, the UN invited me to speak on global multilingual access. But the best part, Stratacor changed their slogan. It no longer said technology, efficiency, power. Now it read, "Everyone has a voice," and in tiny letters beneath inspired by Min Tran. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers behind glass walls, signs secret papers, and makes invisible phone calls when it thinks no one is listening. But I've spent my life listening. To words people didn't say. To silence filled with meaning. So, when the letter came to my desk, a sudden company-wide restructuring proposal, I knew something was wrong. The language was corporate perfect. Streamlining, resource reallocation, department consolidation. But behind every word I heard one truth. They were trying to eliminate Project Bridge. I walked straight to Ramsey's office. He looked up from his monitor. "They think you're too loud," he said before I even spoke. "Who?" I asked. He sighed. "The board. They're scared. Not of you, Min, but of what you represent." I frowned. A multilingual immigrant with a mop. "No," he said. A multilingual immigrant without one. That night I stood alone on the Stratacor rooftop. The city lights blinked like fireflies below. The wind snapped at my coat. I held my badge in one hand and in the other the first email I'd ever written in this building. It was one line. "The Mumbai team needs a translation support." No one had answered it then. Now I was fighting to keep the bridge alive for those who hadn't yet crossed it. But I knew something they didn't. I wasn't the only one anymore. The next morning, the entire support staff division sent a letter to HR, signed in over 20 languages, from Vietnamese to Amharic, from Tagalog to Russian, all saying the same thing. If Min Tran is silenced, so are we. The cafeteria workers signed. The delivery drivers signed. Even Carlos, in shaky English, wrote, "He is our voice. You silence him, you silence me." That afternoon, a silent protest formed in the atrium. Not loud, not angry, just present. Dozens of workers in uniforms stood quietly holding signs. "I speak, I belong, I understand." Executives peeked down from glass offices above, visibly shaken. Ramsey walked out. So did Stacy Lynn. So did the head of legal, the CFO, and a dozen more. And then, someone unexpected stepped forward. Janine Parks, Director of Talent Development. Harvard graduate. Silk blouse. Impeccable posture. She held up her phone. She played Bao's video. Everyone turned. My face appeared on screen. And suddenly, I was narrating. You build bridges. They tried to keep us under the floor, but we became the foundation. That evening, an emergency board meeting was called. I wasn't invited, but Ramsey stood up for me. He told me later how it went. They said you weren't scalable, he said. That your story was 1 in a million. That what worked for you wouldn't work everywhere. I asked him what he replied. He said, "Then let's build a company that works like Min." And the board folded. Unanimous vote. Project Bridge was not only saved, it was elevated. From internal task force to a global initiative, with funding, with staff, with leadership. The next morning, I received a new offer letter. Not a contract, a promotion. Chief Global Integrity Officer. I stared at it for a long time. Then I wrote one line at the bottom and sent it back. Only if you let me train the next me. 3 months later, Bao and I walked into a middle school in the Bronx. It was career day. He had his camera. I had my story. I stood before 40 kids, some wide-eyed, some half asleep. I introduced myself in 9 languages. They laughed. They clapped. One boy shouted, "Do Korean." I nodded and did it. Then I said, "Who here speaks another language at home?" Every hand went up. I smiled. "Good," I said. "You already have superpowers." Never let anyone make you feel small because of your accent, or your uniform, or your parents. One day, those languages will open doors you didn't know existed, and one day, you'll walk through them without asking for permission. Told in emotional cinematic first-person HOA style with final triumph, deep reflection, and an unforgettable ending that inspires. The building looks different when you no longer clean it. Not because the walls change, but because you have. 6 months after my promotion to Chief Global Integrity Officer Stratacore hosted its first ever Voices of the Workforce Summit. Over 500 employees from 22 countries flew in. Not just managers, not just suits, janitors, drivers, kitchen staff, security guards, people whose stories were written in sweat, whose hands shaped this company, but whose names had been left out of every glossy annual report until now. And they asked me to give the keynote speech. Me, Min Tran, the man who once mopped this very marble floor. I stood at the podium. The lights felt softer this time. I looked out into the crowd and saw Carlos in the 3rd row now, team lead for Latin America operations. Next to him sat Amira, formerly in laundry services, now a trilingual advisor for Middle Eastern partnerships. I saw people who had once whispered. Now they were standing. I began. When I first came here, I didn't have a voice. I had a mop. I had silence. I had languages tucked in my heart like folded prayers. But the floor taught me something. If you stay long enough, if you listen deeply enough, even the invisible learn how to be seen. They were quiet, not out of indifference but reverence. This company didn't just give me a title. It gave me a chance to show the world that dignity has no rank, that leadership doesn't wear a tailored suit, it wears honesty. I looked up at Ramsey, seated stage left. He nodded, eyes glassy. "You know, the first thing I bought when I got my first paycheck as a janitor, I asked." Some smiled, expecting a car, a watch. "A dictionary," I said. Used. Hardcover. Smelled like rain and old paper, because I knew one day the right words could save me. And they did. The crowd rose to their feet. Not just applause. Tears. People hugged. People shook hands with janitors they'd ignored for years. The bridge was real now, and everyone was crossing it. Later that evening, as the event ended, I walked past the lobby. A cleaning crew had just arrived, 3 young workers in navy blue uniforms. They paused when they saw me. One whispered, "That's him." I turned back and walked toward them. "You doing okay tonight?" I asked. They nodded quickly. One girl, barely 20, dark hair tied in a bun, looked down shyly and said in Spanish, "Mi papá me dijo que si lo veía, debía darle las gracias." My father told me that if I ever saw you, I should thank you. I looked her in the eye. "Tell your father," I replied in perfect Spanish, "that I was just a janitor." She smiled, and then I added, "But we were never just janitors." The next morning, Bao released the second video. My father's final speech broke the internet. It didn't just go viral, it went global. United Nations reposted it. BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera VTV all featured my story. Translations appeared in over 30 languages. Colleges began using it as curriculum in cross-cultural communication courses. I received letters from janitors in Peru, from nurses in South Africa, from single mothers in rural India, from war veterans in Chicago. One sentence kept repeating, "You made me feel seen." A few weeks later, I visited Lynn's grave. I brought her favorite tea and Bao's video on my phone. I sat beside her and pressed play. The birds chirped. The city buzzed. But for that moment, all I heard was her voice in my memory. "One day, someone will see you, Min. All of you." I smiled. They did, Lynn. They did. Now, when I walk the halls of Stratacore, people greet me in every language. Japanese, Swahili, Urdu, French, even ASL. The walls carry echoes of what was once silent. And there's a new sign above the staff entrance. It reads, "No one is just their job." Underneath, in small letters, are 9 translations, 1 in each language I speak, and 1 in English. We all belong. Conclusion. In a world that often values titles over talent and voices only when they come from corner offices, Min Tran reminded us that greatness can wear a janitor's uniform. That fluency isn't just about language, but understanding dignity and the power of being seen. Meaning of life. You are not just your job. You are not just your accent. You are not just a background character in someone else's story. You matter. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And when one person dares to stand, they become a bridge for many to walk across. Whether you speak 9 languages or only 1, make sure it includes the courage to speak up. Because sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest truths. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel for more powerful true dramas that celebrate courage, justice, and humanity. Comment below. Have you ever been underestimated? Was there a moment where someone finally saw your worth? Tag a friend who needs to hear this, because being invisible ends when we stand together.